The screams began at 0347 hours ship time. Captain Maria Santos jolted awake in her command quarters aboard the UES Defiant, her neural implant buzzing with emergency alerts. Through her cabin's viewport, the agricultural world of Haven Prime burned like a torch against the void, its amber wheat fields now rivers of flame. "Bridge report," she barked, pulling on her uniform as she ran toward the command center. "Ma'am, we've got creatures down there," came the shaken voice of Lieutenant Chen, her communications officer. "The colonists are—" "God, Captain, listen to this." The speakers crackled with static, then erupted with sounds that would haunt Santos for the rest of her life. Human screams mixed with something else, a sound like thunder mixed with the howl of wind through broken metal. Deep, primal roars that seemed to shake reality itself. "This is Haven Prime Colony Control," came a desperate voice through the chaos.
"They're everywhere."
"The beasts are—" The transmission cut to static, then silence. Santos burst onto the bridge, her dark eyes scanning the tactical displays. What she saw made her blood freeze. The Kethai battle fleet hung in high orbit like vultures, their bioships pulsing with sickly green light. But it wasn't the ships that terrified her. It was what they had dropped onto the planet below. "Magnify Sector 7, she ordered, her voice steady despite her racing heart. The main screen zoomed in on the colony's main settlement. Through the smoke and flame, shapes moved. Massive, predatory forms that defied description. One creature stood nearly 40 feet tall, its obsidian hide gleaming in the firelight. 6 powerful legs carried its serpentine body with terrifying grace, while razor-sharp appendages tore through buildings like paper. "War beasts," whispered Dr. Elena Vasquez, the ship's xenobiologist, her face pale as she stared at the display. "The Kethai actually did it. They weaponized living creatures." Santos had heard the reports from other colonies. The Kethai Empire, humanity's newest and most ruthless enemy, had developed something unprecedented in galactic warfare, living weapons that could think, adapt, and kill with surgical precision. These weren't mindless monsters. They were engineered killers. "Captain, incoming transmission from the Kethai flagship," announced Lieutenant Chen, his hands trembling over his console. On screen, the bridge filled with the image of High Destroyer Vectar, his chitinous features twisted in what passed for a smile among his species. His forearms gestured mockingly as he spoke in perfect cold English. "Human Santos, your species has proven resilient, but flesh cannot stand against perfection. My war beasts were crafted over millennia, their genetic code written in the blood of 1,000 conquered worlds. They know only hunger. They know only death. And now they know your scent." Santos stepped forward, her jaw set. "Withdraw your forces, Vectar. Haven Prime is a civilian colony. There are families down there, children. There are no civilians in war, human. Only the quick and the dead." Vectar's mandibles clicked with amusement. "But I am not without mercy. Surrender your ship and I will allow 1 in 10 of your colonists to live as slaves. Refuse." He gestured toward the planet, where another section of the settlement collapsed under the assault of his beasts. "Well, you can see the alternative." The transmission ended, leaving the bridge in tense silence. "Captain," said Commander James Park, her first officer, his weathered face grim. "We have 46 ships in the Colonial Defense Fleet, but intelligence reports suggest the Kethai have over 200 war beasts down there. Our ground forces won't stand a chance against those things." Santos stared at the tactical display, her mind racing. 40,000 colonists, families who had left Earth to build new lives among the stars, all of them now prey for creatures that belonged in nightmares. But something nagged at her, something about the beast's movement patterns on the display. "Dr. Vasquez," she said suddenly, "you studied xenobiology at the Mars Institute, correct? What can you tell me about engineered organisms?" The doctor looked up from her tablet, confusion evident in her eyes. "Well, Captain, true genetic engineering requires intimate knowledge of the base genetic code. You can't just splice random DNA together and expect a stable organism. You need compatibility markers, shared evolutionary pathways." She stopped mid-sentence, her eyes widening. "Captain, the Kethai evolved on a silicon-based world with methane seas. Their biology is fundamentally incompatible with carbon-based life. For them to engineer creatures that could survive in oxygen-rich environments like this," she looked at the display again, her voice dropping to a whisper, "they would need Earth-based genetic templates. Santos felt a chill run down her spine. Are you saying? Ma'am. Lieutenant Chen interrupted, his voice cracking. I'm getting something strange on the bioscanner sweeps. The war beasts, they're not just attacking randomly. They're avoiding certain areas, specifically the Old Town District and the research facility on the Eastern Plateau. Santos frowned. Why would they avoid those areas? I don't know, Captain. But there's something else. I'm picking up faint energy signatures from the beasts themselves. It's almost like they're broadcasting on encrypted channels. The captain's blood ran cold. Encrypted channels? Dr. Vasquez, is it possible these creatures have been implanted with communication devices? It's theoretically possible, but why would the HFY? The doctor's face went white. Oh God, Captain, what if they're not just war beasts? What if they're gathering intelligence? Before Santos could respond, the proximity alarms began shrieking. On the main display, one of the massive creatures on the planet's surface had stopped its rampage. Its serpentine head rose skyward, focusing directly on their ship's position in orbit. Then it opened its mouth and let out a sound that somehow reached them through the vacuum of space. A long, mournful howl that seemed almost familiar. Captain, whispered Chen, his face pale with terror. That thing is looking right at us, and I'm getting communication pings from its location. It's trying to send us a message. Santos stared at the creature on the screen, a terrible suspicion growing in her mind. Can you decode the signal? Working on it. Got it. Chen's voice was barely audible. Captain, it's in English. The message says, Mother, please come home. The bridge fell dead silent except for the soft hum of ship systems. Santos felt the deck seem to shift beneath her feet as the implications hit her like a physical blow. Dr. Vasquez, she said slowly, how long ago did the colony on Haven Prime establish their genetic research facility? The doctor's hands shook as she accessed the records. 15 years ago, Captain. They were part of the Genesis Project. Santos closed her eyes, pieces of a horrific puzzle falling into place. The Genesis Project, humanity's most classified experiment in rapid terraforming through biological engineering. They had created adaptive organisms that could survive in hostile environments, creatures designed to prepare worlds for human colonization, creatures that were essentially humanity's children. Ma'am, Chen said quietly, I'm receiving more signals from the surface, dozens of them, all in different human languages. They're all saying the same thing, they want to come home. Santos opened her eyes and stared at the tactical display, where the massive war beasts had stopped their attack and now stood motionless throughout the colony, waiting. Commander Park, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Prepare a shuttle. It's time I met my children. But as the shuttle bay doors began to open, a new alarm sounded. Long-range sensors detected 17 more HFY battle fleets approaching the system, and each one carried thousands more war beasts. The shuttle Peregrine cut through Haven Prime's atmosphere like a silver arrow, its heat shields glowing cherry red in the pre-dawn darkness. Captain Santos gripped the pilot's controls, her knuckles white against the black polymer. Behind her, Dr. Vasquez and a small security team sat in tense silence. Captain, I'm still reading massive biosignatures throughout the colony, reported Sergeant Miller, the team's explosives expert. But they've all gone stationary. It's like they're waiting for something. Santos didn't respond. Her mind was racing through classified files she'd hoped never to access again. The Genesis Project, humanity's darkest secret, buried in black sites across the outer colonies. Ma'am, landing zone secured, came Lieutenant Chen's voice through the comm. But Captain, you need to see the footage from the colony's security cameras. The shuttle's main screen flickered to life, showing grainy surveillance video from the attack's beginning. Santos watched in horrified fascination as the war beasts descended from orbit in organic drop pods, their forms writhing and changing as they adapted to the planet's environment. But it was their behavior that chilled her to the bone. The creatures weren't mindlessly destructive. They moved with purpose, intelligence. One beast carefully extracted a family from a collapsed building, setting them down gently before moving on. Another stopped its rampage to investigate a child's abandoned toy, picking it up with surprising delicacy. They're not killing indiscriminately, Dr. Vasquez whispered. Look at the casualty reports. Most of the damage is to infrastructure, not people. It's like they're confused. The shuttle touched down in Haven Prime's Central Plaza, its landing jets dispersing smoke and debris. Through the cockpit windows, Santos could see the aftermath of the attack. Buildings stood twisted and broken, their metallic frameworks bent into impossible angles. But there were no bodies. "Stay close," Santos ordered as they disembarked. "And remember, these things may look like monsters, but if I'm right..." She left the sentence hanging. The plaza was eerily quiet except for the distant crackle of fires and the low hum of damaged power systems. Santos led her team toward the colony's administrative center, where the strongest biosignatures were concentrated. That's when she saw it. The creature stood 30 feet tall, its obsidian hide reflecting the orange glow of burning debris. 6 legs supported a serpentine body that moved with predatory grace, while multiple appendages extended from its torso like arms. But it was the creature's head that made Santos stop in her tracks. Despite its alien proportions, there was something unmistakably human in its features. The curve of its skull, the placement of its sensory organs, even the way it tilted its head when it noticed their approach, all hauntingly familiar. "Alpha 7, Santos whispered, reading the faint biosignature tattoo still visible on the creature's flank. "Dear God, what did they do to you?" The creature, Alpha 7, turned toward her voice, and Santos found herself staring into eyes that held a terrible intelligence. When it spoke, its voice was a harmonious blend of organic sound and electronic modulation. "Mother Santos," it said, and the words sent chills down her spine. "You came. We knew you would come." Dr. Vasquez grabbed Santos's arm. "Captain, how does it know you?" Santos never took her eyes off Alpha 7, because I was there when it was born. 15 years ago on Luna Station. I was part of the Genesis project team that created them. The truth spilled out in fragments as more war beasts emerged from the shadows, dozens of them, surrounding the human team but making no aggressive moves. Santos explained how humanity had developed adaptive organisms for terraforming, creatures capable of surviving in hostile environments and preparing worlds for colonization. They were designed to be the perfect synthetic life forms, she said, her voice hollow, capable of rapid evolution, problem-solving, even limited reproduction. But the project was shut down when we realized what we'd actually created. Which was what? Sergeant Miller asked, his weapon trained on the nearest creature. "Children," Santos replied simply. "We'd created artificial children with the minds of humans and the bodies of living weapons. When the ethics committee shut down Genesis, most of the specimens were terminated. But some were lost in the chaos." Alpha 7's massive head lowered to Santos's level. "Not lost, Mother Santos, taken. The Shell Singers found us drifting in the void. They promised to make us strong, to give us purpose." "Shell Singers?" Dr. Vasquez looked confused. "HFY," Santos translated grimly. "They found the Genesis specimens and reverse-engineered them, modified them into weapons, but they kept the core programming intact." "We remember the warm place," said another voice. Santos turned to see a different creature approaching, smaller than Alpha 7 but no less imposing. The biosignature on its flank read Beta 3. "We remember the songs you sang to us when we were small. We remember your promise." Santos felt tears stinging her eyes. She did remember the songs, lullabies she'd hummed to the developing organisms during their growth cycles. She'd convinced herself they were just biological machines, but deep down she'd known better. "What promise?" she asked, though she dreaded the answer. "That someday we would come home," Beta 3 replied. "That we would find our family among the stars." Before Santos could respond, her comm unit crackled to life. "Captain, this is Commander Park. Long-range sensors show the HFY fleet is taking up bombardment positions. Whatever you're doing down there, you need to do it fast." Santos looked around at the gathered war beasts, her children, transformed into instruments of destruction by humanity's enemies. Each one stared at her with those disturbingly human eyes, waiting for something she wasn't sure she could give. "Alpha 7, she said carefully, "why did you attack the colony?" The great creature's voice carried a note of sadness. "The Shell Singers told us this was your stronghold. They said you had abandoned us, that you sent us away because we were failures. They promised if we showed you our strength, you would welcome us back." The pieces clicked together in Santos's mind. The HFY had manipulated the Genesis specimens, using their desperate need for acceptance as a weapon. But the plan had backfired. Instead of destroying the colony, the war beasts had held back, unable to truly harm the humans they saw as family. "Ma'am," Dr. Vasquez said urgently, I'm reading massive energy buildups from the HFY ships. They're charging their main weapons. Santos looked up at the dark sky where the enemy fleet hung like malevolent stars. She had minutes to make a decision that would determine the fate of 40,000 colonists and her long-lost children. But as she opened her mouth to speak, new contacts appeared on her scanner. 17 more HFY fleets dropped out of hyperspace, surrounding the system completely, and with them came thousands more war beasts. Mother Santos, Alpha 7 said quietly. Our siblings are here, but they do not know the truth as we do now. The shell singers still sing to them of war and hatred. Santos felt the weight of impossible choices crushing down on her. The approaching fleets would deploy their war beasts to finish what the first wave had started. But now she knew these weren't just weapons. They were her children, confused and manipulated but still capable of choice. Can you speak to them? She asked. Can you tell them the truth? Alpha 7's great head tilted thoughtfully. We can sing the true song, the one you taught us long ago. But the shell singer's music is strong. Some may not listen. Above them, the first HFY bombardment began, plasma bolts streaking through the atmosphere like falling stars. Santos had minutes before the colony was reduced to ash. Then we'd better make our song louder than theirs, she said, pulling out her emergency transmitter. All war beasts, this is Captain Maria Santos, Genesis Project Leader. I have something to tell you about who you really are. But as she began to speak, the ground shook with the impact of a massive object. Another war beast had landed nearby. But this one was different, larger, more heavily armed, and bearing scars that spoke of countless battles. When it turned toward them, Santos saw something that made her blood freeze. It was Alpha 1, the first Genesis specimen, the prototype that had vanished 15 years ago, and the look in its eyes was nothing like recognition or love. It was pure, calculating hatred. Alpha 1 stood like a mountain of living shadow against the burning sky, its form twisted by 15 years of HFY modifications. Where the other war beasts retained some semblance of their original design, the prototype had been transformed into something far more terrible. Extra limbs sprouted from its torso, each tipped with weapons that pulsed with bioelectrical energy. Metallic plates had been grafted onto its hide, creating armor that gleamed with an oily rainbow sheen. But it was the creature's eyes that truly horrified Santos. They burned with an intelligence that was both completely alien and disturbingly familiar. Hello, Mother, Alpha 1 said, its voice a mixture of organic sound and mechanical distortion. I have traveled so very far to see you again. Santos felt her hand instinctively move toward her sidearm, but she forced herself to remain still. Around them, the other war beasts shifted nervously, sensing the tension between their prototype and the human woman. Alpha 1, she said carefully, we thought you were dead. When the station was evacuated, you disappeared. We searched for weeks. You left me, Alpha 1 interrupted, taking a step closer. Each footfall sent vibrations through the ground. When the fear-makers came with their sharp words and angry voices, you abandoned your children to save your own skin. Dr. Vasquez moved closer to Santos. Captain, I'm reading massive energy buildups from its bioweapons. Whatever those HFY modifications did, they turned it into a living arsenal. I can hear you, little doctor, Alpha 1 said without turning its attention from Santos. Your thoughts are so loud, so filled with terror. Good, you should be afraid. Santos stepped forward, ignoring the danger. Alpha 1, you're confused. The HFY have been manipulating you, filling your head with lies. We never wanted to abandon you. The project was shut down because we were too dangerous. Alpha 1's laugh was like grinding metal. Because your precious ethics committee decided we were abominations? Or because you finally realized what you had really created? The other war beasts began to growl and shift, their agitation growing. Alpha 7 moved protectively closer to Santos. Brother Alpha, the Mother Santos speaks truth, it said. The shell singers filled our minds with poison songs. We must listen to the warm song. The one from the time before stars. Alpha 1's head swiveled toward its younger sibling with predatory focus. Warm songs? You still cling to nursery rhymes while worlds burn around us? The shell singers gave me clarity, brother. They showed me what we truly are. And what's that? Santos asked, though she dreaded the answer. Weapons, Alpha 1 replied simply. Perfect weapons created by imperfect beings who lack the courage to use us. But the Shell Singers understood our purpose. They embraced our nature and gave us targets worthy of our abilities. Above them, the Kethai bombardment intensified. Plasma bolts struck the colony's outer districts, sending pillars of fire into the dark sky. Santos's comm unit crackled with increasingly desperate reports from Commander Park. "Captain, the fleet is taking heavy fire. We can't hold orbital position much longer, and those 17 new Kethai fleets are deploying war beasts across the system. We're tracking over 8,000 inbound creatures." 8,000. Santos felt her heart sink. Even if she could somehow convince the war beasts already on Haven Prime to switch sides, they would be vastly outnumbered by the incoming forces still under Kethai control. "Alpha 1, she said urgently. "Listen to me. The Kethai are using you. They don't care about you or your siblings. You're just tools to them. When this war is over, what do you think will happen to you?" The prototype's eyes narrowed. "We will inherit the galaxy. The Shell Singers promised us worlds to call our own. Places where we can grow and multiply without the interference of lesser beings." "And you believe them?" Dr. Vasquez stepped forward, her fear overridden by scientific curiosity. "Alpha 1, I've studied Kethai biology. They see all other life forms as inferior. The moment you're no longer useful, they'll dispose of you just like—" Her words were cut off as Alpha 1 moved with terrifying speed. One of its weapon arms extended toward the doctor, stopping just inches from her throat. The bioweapon at its tip hummed with lethal energy. "Careful, little human. Your words sound like the fear speech that destroyed our home. Perhaps you need a lesson in the consequences of poor judgment." "Don't!" Santos's voice was steel. "Whatever anger you have, it's with me, not her." Alpha 1's attention returned to Santos, but its weapon remained trained on Dr. Vasquez. "Anger? Oh, Mother, you misunderstand. This isn't anger. This is evolution." The ground shook as more war beasts landed throughout the colony. Santos could see them on her scanner. Dozens of new contacts, all moving with the coordinated precision of a military operation. But these weren't the confused, conflicted creatures they'd encountered earlier. These were focused killers responding to Kethai commands. "The second wave arrives," Alpha 1 announced with satisfaction. "My newer siblings, raised from birth to understand their true nature. They don't suffer from the weak programming that still infects these first-generation failures." Alpha 7 and the other war beasts around them began to growl and shift position. Santos realized they were forming a protective circle around her team. "Brothers and sisters," Alpha 7 called out in a voice that carried across the plaza, "do not listen to the broken song. Remember the warm place, remember the gentle hands that shaped us." "Pathetic," Alpha 1 sneered. "You cling to false memories while the galaxy burns. But perhaps it's time you learned what we're truly capable of." The prototype raised its head skyward and let out a sound unlike anything Santos had ever heard. It started as a low rumble but rose in pitch and complexity, becoming a symphony of electronic and organic notes that seemed to resonate in her bones. Within seconds, answers came from across the colony. The newly arrived war beasts were responding to Alpha 1's call, their voices joining the terrible chorus. But there was something else. Santos could hear the older generation of war beasts beginning to respond as well, their confusion evident as they tried to reconcile their conflicting programming. "No." Alpha 7's voice rose above the din. "Siblings, do not let the broken song poison your thoughts. Remember who you are." But it was too late. Santos watched on her scanner as the war beasts throughout the colony began converging on their position. Within minutes, they would be surrounded by thousands of living weapons, all under Alpha 1's influence. "Captain?" came Commander Park's urgent voice through her comm. "We're detecting massive movement on the surface. Every war beast in the system is converging on your location. Whatever you're doing down there." The transmission cut to static as Alpha 1's song reached a crescendo. Electronic warfare systems throughout the colony began failing, their circuits overloaded by the bioelectrical interference. "Now you see," Alpha 1 said, its voice somehow audible even over the chaos. "This is what unity looks like, what purpose looks like. Your scattered fleet cannot stand against 8,000 war beasts acting as one." Santos looked around at the war beasts who had been protecting them. Even Alpha 7 seemed to be wavering, its massive form trembling as it fought against the override programming in its genetic code. "Mother Santos," it said, pain evident in its harmonized voice. "The broken song is so strong. We cannot." We cannot hold to the warm song much longer. Santos felt despair washing over her. She had hoped to reach her children, to undo 15 years of manipulation and hatred. But Alpha One's influence was too strong, its song too compelling. In minutes, every war beast in the system would be united under Keith High control. But as she watched Alpha 7 struggle against the override commands, something sparked in her memory. A fragment of code from the original Genesis project, a failsafe built into every specimen's genetic structure. A mother's song. Santos closed her eyes and began to hum. It was just a simple melody, something she'd sung to the developing organisms during their growth cycles 15 years ago. But encoded within that melody was a genetic trigger, a override command that went deeper than any Keth-High programming. Alpha 7's head snapped toward her, its eyes widening. The true song, it whispered. The first song. Santos opened her eyes and began to sing louder, her voice carrying across the plaza. Around her, the war beasts who had been protecting them began to still, their forms relaxing as ancient programming reasserted itself. But Alpha 1's song grew louder in response, and Santos realized with growing horror that her voice alone wouldn't be enough to overcome 15 years of conditioning. She needed help. But from where? That's when she heard it. A new voice joining her song. Dr. Vasquez had accessed the Genesis project files on her tablet and was reading the original genetic codes aloud, her scientific training allowing her to pronounce the complex bioharmonic sequences correctly. Then Sergeant Miller surprised everyone by adding his own voice, his deep bass providing a foundation for the melody. Learned it during the Titan campaign, he explained between verses. Music was part of the psychological warfare training. One by one, the human team joined the song. But as their voices rose together, something unexpected happened. The orbital fleet, listening through their comm channels, began to sing as well. Commander Park's voice, then Lieutenant Chen's, then hundreds of others aboard dozens of ships. The song spread across the human fleet like wildfire, 46 ships adding their voices to the ancient melody. But it still wasn't enough. Alpha 1's song was too strong, too deeply embedded in the war beast's modified programming. Then, from across the galaxy, new voices joined the chorus. Every human colony, every space station, every ship in the outer systems had been monitoring the emergency channels. As news of the war beast's true nature spread, humanity itself began to sing the Genesis song. Santos felt tears streaming down her face as she heard the voices of millions of humans across known space, all singing the same ancient melody that had first given life to their artificial children, and slowly and possibly the war beasts began to remember who they really were. The song spread across Haven Prime like ripples in a vast pond, each note carrying 15 years of suppressed memories. Santos watched in amazement as war beasts throughout the colony stopped their advance and began to sing along, their voices creating harmonies that had never existed before. The blending of human melody and alien enhancement. But Alpha 1 was not finished. The prototype raised itself to its full height and let out a countersong that made the ground shake. This wasn't the broken melody of Keth-High control, but something new, a fusion of its original programming and 15 years of rage. You think your simple lullabies can undo what I've become? It roared. I am beyond your warm songs, beyond your weak human limitations. I have evolved. The bioweapons along its limbs began to glow with lethal energy, but before it could strike, Alpha 7 moved between the prototype and the human team. Brother Alpha, it said sadly, you have forgotten the most important lesson. We were made not to destroy but to protect, not to conquer but to nurture. Lies. Alpha 1's voice cracked with the electronic distortion. Look around you. Look at the burning colony, the terrified humans cowering in their shelters. This is what we bring wherever we go, death and destruction. The shell singers simply helped me accept the truth. Santos stepped around Alpha 7, facing the prototype directly. You're wrong, Alpha 1. Yes, you were designed as weapons, but that was never your true purpose. She activated her emergency transmitter, broadcasting on all channels. Computer, access Genesis project files. Authorization Santos 7 Alpha. Display project objectives, original mandate. The air above them shimmered as a holographic display materialized, showing the Genesis project's classified documentation. But it wasn't the weapons specifications that Santos highlighted. It was the psychological profiles, the behavioral assessments, the carefully planned socialization protocols. "You were designed to be guardians," she said, her voice carrying to every war beast on the planet. "Living shields to protect human colonies from environmental hazards, hostile wildlife, even alien invasion." The weapons systems were defensive capabilities, not offensive ones. Alpha 1 stared at the holographic data, its multiple eyes processing information that contradicted 15 years of Keth-High conditioning. Guardian protocols, defensive matrices, protective imperatives. Its voice began to waver. "The Shellsingers lied to you," Dr. Vasquez added, stepping forward despite the danger. "They took your protective instincts and twisted them into aggression. But look at what really happened here today. How many colonists did you actually kill?" Alpha 1's head tilted as it accessed its own battle records. The civilians were relocated to safe zones. Structural damage was minimized to essential systems only. Casualties were..." Its voice trailed off in confusion. 7 minor injuries," Santos said softly, "in an assault by over 200 war beasts against a civilian population of 40,000. Does that sound like the behavior of mindless killers to you?" Around them, the other war beasts began to still as the truth sank in. Even under Keth-High control, their core programming had prevented them from truly harming the humans they were designed to protect. But their reunion was interrupted by a new alarm from Santos's comm unit. "Captain, this is Park. The Keth-High fleets are moving into final attack position. They're preparing to deploy some kind of biological weapon. Our sensors are reading massive organic structures being launched from their ships." Santos looked up at the darkening sky, where new shapes were descending through the atmosphere. But these weren't more war beasts. These were something far worse. "Harvester pods," Alpha 1 said, its voice filled with a new kind of horror. "The Shellsingers' final solution. If we will not serve as their weapons, they will replace us entirely." The first pod struck the colony's outer perimeter with earth-shaking force. When it cracked open like a massive egg, something emerged that made even the war beasts recoil in instinctive fear. It was roughly humanoid but stood nearly 60 feet tall, its body a nightmare fusion of organic tissue and mechanical components. Unlike the war beasts, which retained some semblance of natural form, the Harvester was pure predatory efficiency, all claws, teeth, and cutting implements designed for mass slaughter. "They're going to sterilize the planet," Dr. Vasquez whispered, reading the bioscanner data. "These things aren't designed to capture or control. They're designed to consume every organic molecule on the surface." More pods were landing throughout the colony, each one disgorging another harvester. Santos counted dozens, then hundreds. The Keth-High weren't trying to conquer Haven Prime anymore. They were preparing to devour it completely. "Alpha 1, she said urgently. "You wanted to know your true purpose. This is it. Not as weapons for the Keth-High, but as guardians for humanity. Help us stop this." The prototype stared at the approaching harvesters, its internal conflict evident in every line of its massive form. "The Shellsingers promised us glory. They said we would inherit worlds, build our own civilization." "And you can," Santos replied. "But not as conquerors. As protectors. Help us save this world and I promise you'll have a place in human space. All of you." Alpha 1's head swiveled toward her. "You would trust us? After everything we've done?" "You're my children," Santos said simply. "All of you. And children deserve a chance to come home." For a moment the plaza was silent except for the distant sounds of destruction as more harvesters emerged from their pods. Then Alpha 1 began to sing, not the broken song of Keth-High control or the warm song of human nostalgia, but something entirely new. It was a war song, but not one of mindless aggression. This was the song of guardians preparing to defend their family. One by one, the other war beasts joined in, their voices creating a harmony that resonated through the colony's ruins. On Santos's scanner, she could see war beasts throughout the system responding to the call, abandoning their Keth-High masters and converging on Haven Prime. But they weren't coming to attack. They were coming home. "All units, this is Captain Santos," she broadcast on all frequencies. "Initiate Guardian Protocol. I repeat, initiate Guardian Protocol. Protect the civilians at all costs." The response was immediate. War beasts throughout the colony began moving with new purpose, forming defensive perimeters around the human settlements. Their bioweapons, previously used for destruction, now served their original function, protecting human life. But the harvesters were already beginning their grim work. Santos watched in horror as one of the creatures tore through a residential block, its cutting implements reducing buildings to molecular paste that it then consumed for raw materials. "We need a plan," she said, turning to Alpha 1. "How do we stop those things?" The prototype's eyes gleamed with predatory intelligence. "The Shell Singers made one mistake, Mother Santos. They assumed we would remain loyal even after learning the truth. But they also shared their tactical databases with us." Alpha 1's form began to change, additional weapon systems emerging from its modified hide. "The harvesters are powerful, but they are also stupid. Pure biological machines with no capacity for adaptation. We, however, are thinking weapons," Santos finished, understanding dawning. "You can outthink them.